So right below of my magic books, you might find a random section of my drawers where there's a whole bunch of stacks of cards. And you might be wondering, what do I do with all of these old, worn out cards? Now, if you're like me and you use the heck out of your cards, chances are you burn through them quite fast. So then you're left with a whole bunch of old and nasty cards that you don't really know what to do with, and they're just sort of there, so either just throw them out or recycle them. But there's honestly more uses for them than you might think. So honestly, here's just a couple of ways that I can think to sort of prolong the use of these old cards, because you might as well make the most out of these cards that you bought already. So yeah, here's just a couple of random ideas regarding using old cards. One is that you use them to practice certain types of moves. Now, I know everyone pretty much suggests this, but you know, it's a practical suggestion, right? If you don't want to ruin your newer cards and risk like destroying them for whatever type of move. So for example, like Mercury card folds, right? You fold the cards, right? You crease them and you can't really use them anymore. Or maybe like concepts like the softened card, or things like card throwing where the corner is sure to like bend or dent, right? You don't really want to use like new cards for that because again, you value your new cards. You don't want to destroy them. In that case, might as well use old decks, right? Might as well use old decks and just beat them up and just find another use for them, right? They're already beat up, so you might as well just destroy them. So using them to practice certain types of moves that would otherwise destroy cards is a good idea to use old decks for. Suggestion number 2 is that you use them as a buffer for card game night. Look, sometimes it happens, you're playing or practicing with your cards and you're hanging out with your friends, and then all of a sudden, they just want to play card games for whatever reason. And you're like, I'm in danger. Because you're playing around with your cards and they're like, oh yeah, we need a deck of cards. And you just so happen to be holding one. And, you know, you're using a deck that you like, or you're using a deck that you're breaking in, and you don't want to lend it to them, right? So what do? You just use an old deck, right? You have an old deck somewhere in your drawer or whatever, or you're carrying it, right? You can just take it out, just hand them the deck and just be like, okay, here's a sacrifice. We can play card games with this one, not with the deck that I'm currently using. So instead of offering your new deck, you're offering up your old one, and then they can beat it up, they can place it on their dirty table or whatever, and you know, you don't like have to ruin your new deck, and everyone gets to have fun. So that's an easy fix. Number 3 is that you use them for arts and crafts. There's actually quite a lot of transformative things that you can do with playing cards. You can fold them and cut them to make like origami type things. You can cut and bend them for like card roses. You can draw on them for like a sort of unique look, because I've seen like people actually draw on playing cards, and you know, they sort of add it with the pips and whatnot, so it's sort of like a transformation deck. And then you can also make hyper cards out of them if you just cut them in certain ways, right? You can also frame the cards for like an uncut sheet, right? So there's honestly quite a bit of arts and crafts that you can do with a deck of playing cards, since there's already so much color on them, and they're pretty much already art pieces on their own. So you know, if you just fiddle around with them and just cut them up and do whatever that you want with it, you can actually create something that's really, really cool as well. Isn't the same vein as like Magic or Cardistry? Not in particular, but you know, you might find something that you might enjoy as well. So might as well fiddle around and see what you can make out of it. You can also add a single card from a used deck into a new deck with the same back design. So as discussed in the introduction to whatever concepts video, there is something called the worn card. It's basically a concept where you place a card from an older deck into a newer deck, and because of the darker edges from the used deck, you'll be able to spot it from a squared up deck, right? From all sides. So it basically acts as a key card with a naturally like created edge marking, which means that then you could just cut straight to the worn card, or you can do whatever that you want with it. But the idea is that, you know, because you cut the deck and that you have this edge marking, you could use it for whatever that you want. So you can use it as a worn card for any sorts of magic effects that you want in your repertoire. So number 5 is that you can make certain gaffs or gimmicks with these old cards. So if you ever want to make like gaff cards like double backers, double facers, blank cards or any other type of advanced gimmick, chances are you'll need to destroy cards because you either need to cut them up, you need to split them, you need to like rough them up, right? Anything that you want. It rarely does a card survive intact, so you don't really want to use a new deck for that, in which case you have a whole stack of used cards. So then, you know, why not just use these old cards to create gimmicks for your new decks rather than just throwing them out? So that is a pretty good use for them. Obviously, I don't really have a tutorial for splitting cards or whatever, but if you want, you can split cards, just glue them back together, and then just use them for whatever that you want. So you can craft gimmicks and gaffs out of these old cards rather than just throwing them out. So that is another use that most people, especially magicians, find for these old cards. Now to expand on the previous point, why stop at just a few cards, right? You might as well just gaff an entire deck, right? You can make an invisible deck, a Svengali deck if you just want to like cut the corners a bit, right? All that stuff. You can also make your own rainbow deck if you have like 52 different back designs in your bin for whatever reason, right? Because I know like people do tend to use a whole bunch of different back designs, unless you're a working magician, in which case you would probably have the same back design. But if you're someone like me who likes to collect cards as well, then chances are you might have 52 different back designs, in which case you can make a rainbow deck, or you can even load up your playing card index with old cards. So then you have to rip open a new deck and just do, right? You can just use your old decks for different types of scenarios, in which case, you know, it can be used for good magic effects, like again, the invisible deck, the Svengali deck, and all of that stuff. So an entire deck of old cards can be used for magic effects on its own. And then the last suggestion that I have is actually to just store and document them. It's sort of a hoarder thing, but I actually did this for a while before I was like, I have too many cards, so I'm gonna give up on this. But essentially, I still have my first deck with me. It's lost quite a few cards and it's missing a box, but it's still there. So each deck of cards in my collection has its own history, right? It has its own, like, it has seen through like different practices. It's seen through like different stages of my life. So honestly, sometimes those stages of your life might be important. In which case, you know, you can actually just write a brief description on like a post-it note or maybe like on a piece of paper. And then what you want is that you can actually just tape it over the box. You can slip the note into the box itself. And then you have basically a story in it, right? You have a story where you can then you can remember those times where you're like, oh yeah, I was in this stage of life, like I was learning this particular sleight from this date to this date and all of that stuff. So it's just honestly a good way to just have a bit of nostalgia, because you really don't realize how much time has passed in between of your practice sessions, because like like my career has passed by in an instant. I didn't realize that it's been like just many years, right? So having decks of cards to actually just document everything rather than just like a typical diary, I think it's kind of sort of a cool way to just have like a story, and it's a good way to revisit all of these like stages of life and all of these old decks of cards that you have in your collection. So that's just another way to use up your old cards, is that you just don't use them. You just let them sit there and just let you like reflect back on, you know, all of that stuff. So that is the final suggestion that I have for used decks of cards. And those were all of the possible uses that I have for old worn out cards. It's a video on the shorter end, but it's also not quite what I traditionally discuss about. But I do realize that I had a stack of used cards, and you know, I thought, hey, just why not make a video on it? Because I do use all of these things, right? I do make like different arts and crafts. I do document some of my particular decks, right? I still have my first deck. I still have them stored somewhere, right? So all of these cards that I still have, right? I use them with all the suggestions that I've given in this video. I don't know if I just spoke proper English, but it doesn't really matter. So yeah. old cards are extremely useful, and I know that sometimes it might be tempting to just like throw out like your used cards to like the recycling bin and whatever, right? But everything has its use, and you know, in this case, I presented 7 of them to you, and yeah, I hope that this video gave you some ideas on how to use old, worn out decks of cards. But yeah, that'll be it. That'll be it for this shorter video and a bit of a weird oddball video. But yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, and yeah, see you guys next time for another video.